It is not entirely impossible that before this year is out, we will see Earth's mightiest, wealthiest nation elect as president an inmate of one of its prisons. Look, don't sound shocked, we've been into this. The framers of the United States Constitution, clever men though they were, seem not to have considered that a plurality of their fellow citizens might one day choose to award their highest office to a convicted felon, so there is no law against it. And indeed it has been attempted more than once, most successfully by Eugene Debs in 1920, who won nearly 1 million votes nationwide running on the Socialist Party ticket from the federal penitentiary in Atlanta, where he was doing a stretch for sedition, after urging resistance to the draft for World War I. In the meantime, any prisoners presently whiling away their sentences, cultivating aspirations of one day leading the nation which has banged them up, may draw an amount of inspiration from Panama, which has sort of elected a president who is sort of a prisoner. Well, sort of.
Fuerte el aplauso para el presidente de la República de Panamá!
The headline is that Panama's new president-elect is José Raúl Mulino, who has previously held posts including Minister of Justice, Minister of Public Security and Minister of Foreign Affairs. However, it is reasonable to suppose that many, if not most, of those of his fellow Panamanians who voted for him felt themselves to be voting for someone else entirely, that someone else being Ricardo Martinelli, who has for the last 3 months been hiding from the law in the Nicaraguan embassy in Panama City. At which point, the foreign desk explainer realises that it does have some explaining to do, but not before we reiterate our deeply felt animus against countries which simply name their capital city after the country, e.g. Panama City, Mexico City, Luxembourg City, Guatemala City, Kuwait City and Djibouti City, and don't think we're not seeing straight through San Salvador, Algiers and Brasilia. It's like your flag just being a blank sheet with the name of the country written on it, or calling your currency the money. Make a goddamn effort. Anyway, back to Ricardo Martinelli, presently the guest of Panama City's Embassy of Nicaragua, which is itself only just off the hook, redoubling up the name of the country and the capital, Managua, sharing a barely acceptable sequence of 4 corresponding letters. Martinelli has had one previous whack at being president of Panama from 2009 to 2014 and was, in fairness, very popular, despite or because of the eccentricities that led his own supporters to endow him with the nickname El Loco. However, Panama's somewhat parsimonious constitution limits presidents to 1 5-year term at a time, and after completing his, Martinelli returned to his pre-politics predilection for making large amounts of money. He had and/or has extensive interests in supermarkets, banking, energy and commodities, and is generally reckoned to be a billionaire. But last year, shortly after being selected as the presidential candidate of the conservative Realising Goals Party, he was convicted over a scam by which he and fellow conspirators had appropriated public funds to buy a media group whose newspapers shortly thereafter pivoted to favourable coverage of Martinelli and his works. Martinelli was fined the thick end of $20 million, which probably wouldn't have bothered him over much, and sentenced to 10 years and change in the clink, which clearly did bother him a great deal, to the extent that in February he presented himself at the Nicaraguan embassy seeking asylum, along with his dog, Bruno, who, to judge by the steady stream of pictures Martinelli has since posted, is some sort of terrier, but we are no expert. Martinelli, it should be noted, denies the charges and others past and pending as a politically motivated witch hunt, etc. Nevertheless, they were sufficient for Panama's Supreme Court to disqualify him from the election, at which point Mulino stepped forward in his stead.
Aquí estamos porque hemos llegado con el voto mayoritario del pueblo panameño. Duélale a quien le duela.
Martinelli is probably not Mulino's most pressing concern right now. The non-Martinelli shelf of Mulino's in-tray is plenty to be getting on with. Panama is presently grappling with pretty much its biggest imaginable problem, which is that the waters of its canal are ebbing, a consequence of El Niño-caused drought. Crossings through the canal, which at peak manages 40% of all container traffic to and from the United States, have been reduced by nearly half. There have been 3-week queues to cross. Those ships which are allowed through are having to carry less, and while shipping traffic through the canal is sluggish, illegal migration through the Darien Gap, Panama's jungly border with Colombia, is thriving, with more than 500,000 people trekking towards the US last year. But to bring us back to where we came in, and with an eye on a bigger presidential election in November also featuring a legally compromised candidate, the question remains as to why people would knowingly vote for the proxy of a convicted criminal who is hiding in an embassy storage closet. It is, by this point in the democratic experiment, depressingly easy to answer. Martinelli is among that coterie of politicians who has discovered that dauntless, irrepressible shamelessness is kind of a superpower, and that a ready plurality of voters are absolutely on board for a victimhood narrative which enables them to excuse their own failures as the fault of a malevolent establishment. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Mueller.